I sat alone at my dining table, wearing the sage green dress I'd carefully selected for my daughter's wedding. For months, I had visualized this day, how Emma would turn to me with teary eyes as I fastened my mother's pearl earrings to her ears, how we'd share a quiet moment before she walked down the aisle, how I'd whisper, "I'll always be here for you, sweetheart." But none of that happened because 3 weeks ago she had called to tell me she didn't want me at her wedding. Her voice had been cold, detached. "Mom, I think it would be better if you weren't there." No explanation, no room for discussion, just those devastating words that shattered my heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The house felt unbearably silent that Saturday morning. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall, knowing that at that very moment, my only daughter was becoming someone's wife, and I wasn't there to witness it. I had made coffee I couldn't drink, and wrapped a gift I would never give. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, threatening to suffocate me. I didn't cry immediately. Instead, I sat perfectly still, one hand gripping the edge of the table as if it could somehow anchor me to reality. I told myself perhaps she would call, that there had been a mistake, that this nightmare wasn't really happening. But it was. And with each passing minute, the silence only grew more deafening. When my doorbell rang early Sunday morning, I almost didn't answer. I was still wearing yesterday's dress, though it now felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. I opened the door slowly, expecting a package delivery or perhaps a well-meaning neighbor. Instead, I found James, my daughter's new husband, standing on my porch. His wedding suit was rumpled, his tie missing, and the top buttons of his shirt undone. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked utterly lost. He didn't greet me. Instead, he simply asked, "Patricia, can we talk?" Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that might just change your perspective on family and forgiveness. Before all of this, before the silence, before the heartbreak, before the wedding I wasn't allowed to attend, there was love. A profound, unshakable love that I believed nothing could ever destroy. That was what Emma and I had shared. She was my only child, born after 18 hours of labor and 6 years of fertility treatments. The moment they placed her in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine as if she'd been searching for me, I knew my life had found its purpose. From that day forward, it was just the two of us navigating life together. Her father, Daniel, had walked out when she was only 14 months old, claiming he wasn't cut out for fatherhood. I never spoke ill of him in Emma's presence. I wanted her to believe in love and trust, despite his betrayal. I worked as an elementary school counselor during the day and waited tables 3 nights a week just to keep us afloat. Every school, play, every soccer game, every birthday with homemade cakes shaped like her favorite animals or cartoon characters, I was there, camera in hand, cheering louder than anyone else. Even when money was tight, Emma never knew the extent of our struggles. I made sure her world remained soft and secure, filled with bedtime stories and Sunday pancake traditions. We were extraordinarily close, the kind of close where she would still crawl into my bed during thunderstorms even as a teenager, whispering, "Just until the storm passes, Mom." The kind of close where we had movie nights every Friday with matching pajamas and homemade popcorn. The kind of close where people often commented that we seemed more like best friends than mother and daughter. Emma was always bright, compassionate, and quick to laugh. She had her father's amber eyes, but thankfully, not his tendency to run when things got difficult. She told me everything, her dreams, her fears, her crushes. At least she used to. I remember clearly the evening she brought James home for the first time. She was 26, radiant and confident in a way I hadn't seen before. He was thoughtful, articulate and attentive in a manner that immediately impressed me. I liked him not only because he treated Emma with respect, but because when she spoke, he listened with genuine interest. His eyes followed her around the room as if she were the most fascinating person he'd ever encountered. Perhaps that's why I didn't see any warning signs. I trusted her judgment. I trusted our bond. When they announced their engagement after 18 months of dating, I cried tears of joy. Not out of sadness, but because it felt like we were entering an exciting new chapter together. I envisioned us planning the wedding side by side, shopping for her dress, visiting venues, tasting cakes, and laughing over the inevitable mishaps that come with organizing such an important event. I started a dedicated wedding notebook almost immediately, jotting down ideas for venues, photographers, and florists I thought might suit Emma's taste. I wasn't trying to take over. I just wanted to be helpful, to share in her happiness. I even purchased a pair of vintage sapphire earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Something blue, something old. I planned to give them to her on her wedding morning, a piece of our family history to carry forward into her new life. We actually did look at wedding venues together once. Emma had come over with bridal magazines and her laptop. We sat at the kitchen table with cups of chamomile tea, scrolling through websites and discussing the merits of garden ceremonies versus historic buildings. That afternoon, laughing and dreaming together, felt like the perfect continuation of our relationship. I held that memory close, not realizing it would be the last time she actively included me in her wedding plans. The shift didn't happen overnight. Looking back, I can see how it crept in gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Emma began calling less frequently. Our weekly Sunday brunches became monthly, then sporadic. Her responses to my texts grew, shorter, sometimes just one-word replies. She stopped ending our calls with, "Love you," something she'd done since she was old enough to speak those words. I didn't push initially. I told myself she was just busy, overwhelmed with wedding planning, and her demanding job as a physical therapist. I thought she'd come back around once things settled. In retrospect, I realize I was ignoring the changes because I couldn't bear to acknowledge them. I couldn't accept that the closeness we had built over nearly 3 decades could be so easily dismantled. But in those quiet months before everything fell apart completely, I remained hopeful. I still pictured myself helping her into her wedding dress, still imagined the moment I'd see her walk down the aisle, still practiced a short speech I hoped to give at the reception. I believed it would be a day we'd both treasure forever, a celebration of not just her love story with James, but of our journey together as mother and daughter. I had no idea that I was already being written out of the narrative, becoming a peripheral character in a story where I had once been co-author. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible if you weren't paying attention. But mothers notice everything, even when we pretend not to. The moment I first realized something was truly wrong happened on a Sunday afternoon in early spring. Emma had invited me to join her and James for lunch with his parents at an upscale restaurant downtown. I was thrilled, not just to see her after nearly 3 weeks without contact, but because I hoped this meant she was drawing me back into her life. The restaurant was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor. James's parents, Richard and Vivienne, were already seated when I arrived. Vivienne wore an impeccably tailored cream pantsuit and designer glasses that she didn't remove even indoors. James stood to greet me warmly. Emma remained seated, offering only a tepid, "Mom, you made it." It wasn't what she said, but how she said it, with a hint of surprise, as if my presence was unexpected rather than anticipated. I smiled through the sting, responding brightly, "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." When the server brought menus, I mentioned my recent switch to plant-based eating and asked about vegetarian options. Vivienne made a dismissive noise and murmured, "Oh, another one of those." Emma didn't defend me. Instead, she laughed nervously and changed the subject. I let it go, not wanting to create tension. The conversation eventually turned to wedding plans, and James mentioned they had finalized the guest list the previous day. Excited to contribute, I pulled a small business card from my purse. "Have you decided on a photographer yet?" I asked. My colleague's son just started a wedding photography business, and his portfolio is absolutely stunning. He's offering special rates for— "We've got it handled," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp enough to make everyone at the table pause. The smile on my face froze as I looked at her, surprised by the curtness of her tone. I began. "I know," she said, softening slightly but still firm. "But it's really something we've already taken care of." The table fell silent. James studied his water glass intently. Vivienne raised an eyebrow and took a deliberate sip of her mimosa. I carefully tucked the card back into my purse, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Of course," I managed, forcing a light laugh. I didn't mean to overstep. But something inside me cracked in that moment. It wasn't just what she said. It was the dismissive way she said it, as if my input was not just unnecessary but unwelcome. Emma had always been respectful, even during her teenage years when disagreements were inevitable. She had never cut me off so abruptly, never made me feel small, especially in front of others. That evening, I replayed the interaction repeatedly, trying to understand what had happened. At first, I told myself it was just wedding stress, or perhaps an attempt to impress James's obviously wealthy parents, who clearly viewed me, a public school counselor who lived in a modest home, as somewhat beneath their social standing. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. The look in Emma's eyes hadn't been stress. It had been irritation, maybe even embarrassment, at me. Over the following weeks, other concerning patterns emerged. Emma stopped sending me updates about wedding preparations. I discovered she'd had a bridal shower when a mutual friend posted photos online. When I commented, "Everything looks beautiful. Hope it was a wonderful day," Emma never responded. I learned about her bachelorette weekend in Savannah through Instagram stories posted by her friends. I tried to stay involved in gentle, unobtrusive ways. I texted her a photo of my mother's veil, asking if she'd like to incorporate it as her something borrowed. After 3 days, she replied simply, "Going with something else, but thanks." No explanation, no appreciation for the sentiment behind the offer. When I asked if she needed help addressing invitations, she informed me that James's mom's assistant is handling that. When I suggested hosting a small gathering for her childhood friends who might not make the guest list for the main event, she replied, "It's not really the vibe we're going for," with a smiling emoji that somehow made the rejection even more painful. One afternoon, I drove to her apartment with a basket of her favorite lemon blueberry muffins and a small box of childhood mementos I thought might inspire her wedding planning. Pressed flowers from family vacations, her first ballet recital, program, a handmade Mother's Day card where she'd written, "You're my best friend forever." James answered the door, looking uncomfortable. "She's not really up for visitors right now," he said apologetically. I offered to leave the basket, which he accepted with a sad smile. The box of memories was returned to me a week later via mail, unopened, with no note. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated gradually until I realized we hadn't had a meaningful conversation in over 6 weeks. No wedding updates, no, "Mom, what do you think about this?" No questions, no warmth, no connection. She had stopped needing me, or perhaps more painfully, she had stopped wanting me in her life. I made excuses for her behavior. Maybe it was James's influence, though he had always been kind to me. Maybe it was pressure from his family, who clearly had strong opinions about how things should be done. Maybe it was just a phase, a natural separation as she prepared to start her own family. But deep down, I feared something more fundamental was changing, something I couldn't understand or reach. I began doubting myself, reviewing every interaction we'd had over the past year, searching for the moment I might have overstepped or offended her. Had I been too enthusiastic, too traditional, too involved? I questioned my memories, my perceptions, my worth as a mother. I cried more nights than I cared to admit, always quietly, always alone. I didn't want friends telling me, "That's just how daughters are before weddings," because it had never been that way with us. We had always faced life as a team. I started feeling like a ghost in her life, someone who had once been essential, but who had faded into the background without anyone noticing or caring. The most painful part wasn't the exclusion itself, it was the rewriting of our relationship. I heard through a mutual friend that Emma had told her bridesmaids, "My mom just isn't a part of this phase of my life." That sentence cut deeper than any knife, as if I had chosen to step back, as if I had voluntarily removed myself from her important moments. In the span of a few months, I had gone from being her confidant, her support system, her best friend forever, to becoming an afterthought, an obligation to be managed. But I still smiled when neighbors asked about the wedding. I still told coworkers how excited I was for her. I still bought small gifts whenever I saw something she might like, a scented candle in her favorite vanilla fig fragrance, cozy slippers for winter mornings, a cookbook featuring the Mediterranean recipes she loved. I kept them in a drawer beside my bed, not knowing if I'd ever have the chance to give them to her. Some nights, I would scroll through photos on my phone. Emma's college graduation, her 25th birthday party at the beach, the hiking, trip we took to the Smoky Mountains when she was 17. I'd watch videos of her making silly faces, singing along to the radio on road trips, surprising me with breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. In those moments, I felt like I was grieving, someone who was still alive. I hadn't lost my daughter to accident or illness. I was losing her to deliberate distance, to cold, intentional exclusion. It was a kind of grief I had never prepared for and didn't know how to process. The final humiliation came on a Thursday evening in the form of a simple technology mistake. I was making dinner, a vegetable curry that had always been Emma's favorite when she came home, when my phone chimed with a notification. I had been added to a group chat titled Emma's Bridal Babes. My heart actually skipped with hope. Maybe this was her way of including me again, of bringing me back into her world. I opened the chat eagerly. The first messages were just photos, bridesmaids trying on matching robes, screenshots of hairstyle ideas, a picture of Emma and James dancing in their living room. Then came messages from women I barely knew, her college roommates, cousins, friends from work. Some I had met only once or twice, but they were discussing me as if I were a category, a stereotype, a problem to be managed. Em says her mom will probably try to make a scene if she's not seated at the head table. Classic helicopter mom energy. She needs to let go already. Someone please make sure she doesn't wear cream or white. I've seen the pictures. She's totally the type. Is she even still coming? Emma barely mentions her anymore. My hands trembled as I scrolled, feeling like I was eavesdropping on a conversation I was never meant to hear. Someone had added me to the chat by mistake, and they had no idea I was seeing their words. Then, between the laughing emojis and wedding countdown excitement, came my daughter's response. She means well, but she's just too much sometimes. Everything becomes a guilt trip with her. I honestly don't have the energy to deal with it on my wedding day. I stared at those words until they blurred, reading them over and over as if they might somehow rearrange themselves into something less painful. This wasn't just a private complaint. This was my daughter giving an entire group permission to mock and dismiss me. These people who knew nothing about the nights I'd stayed up with Emma when she was sick, the extra jobs I'd worked to pay for, her dance lessons, the countless ways I'd tried to make her life beautiful. They were all laughing at me behind a digital door, and my daughter had given them the key. I didn't feel anger. I felt hollow, gutted. This wasn't just unkindness. It was betrayal in its purest form. I sat down on a kitchen stool, the curry boiling over on the stove behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't reply to the chat. I didn't leave the group dramatically. I simply read every message, absorbing each painful word, then quietly removed myself from the conversation. I didn't call Emma. I didn't send a tearful text. I didn't even cry that night. I just felt small, diminished, like I had become the punchline to a joke in a story I thought I'd helped write with love. The next morning, I opened my closet and stared at the sage green dress I'd purchased for the wedding. I had chosen it carefully, elegant but not flashy, a color that would complement the spring garden venue without drawing attention from the bridal party. Now it seemed like a costume for a role I would never play. That weekend, I received a text from Emma. "Hey, just double-checking that you don't need a place on the seating chart, right?" No apology, no acknowledgement of the group chat, just cold logistics, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than her mother. I typed several responses, deleting each one. I didn't trust myself to reply without revealing how deeply she had wounded me. In the end, I simply wrote, "Correct, I won't be attending. I wish you happiness on your special day." That night, I cried until there were no tears left, my pillow damp with grief. Not because of the cruelty itself, but because I had finally accepted the truth. My daughter didn't want me at her wedding. She didn't want me in her life anymore. And no amount of love or sacrifice or understanding on my part could change that reality. There was no dramatic confrontation, no heated argument, no slamming doors. Just silence and the gradual acceptance that something precious had been lost. After discovering the group chat and receiving Emma's text confirming my absence, I realized there was nothing left to fight for. I hadn't been excluded from her wedding in the heat of a moment. I had been systematically removed from her life, one deliberate step at a time. So I let go. Letting go wasn't a single decision, but a series of small surrenders that felt like defeats at first. I removed the wedding planning board I'd created on Pinterest. I carefully folded the sage green dress and placed it in a donation bag for the women's shelter downtown. I took the vintage sapphire earrings and returned them to their velvet box, tucking them away in my jewelry drawer, not discarded, but no longer charged with expectation and hope. I walked through my small home, removing the subtle preparations I'd made for what I thought would be a joyful season. I cleared the guest room I had refreshed with new linens and Emma's favorite lavender candles, thinking perhaps she and James might stay there after their rehearsal dinner. I canceled the hair appointment I'd scheduled for the morning of the wedding. I withdrew the money I'd been saving to contribute to their honeymoon fund, and instead donated half to the youth counseling center where I worked and put the rest toward a long-postponed repair to my roof. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not my sister in Arizona, who had called just weeks earlier saying, "She'll come around. Daughters always come back to their mothers." Not my colleagues who occasionally asked about wedding preparations. Not the neighbors who had watched Emma grow up and were excited to see pictures of her as a bride. I didn't want anyone's pity. I didn't want to hear platitudes about how kids today behave. I needed space to grieve, to understand, and perhaps eventually to accept that the daughter I had raised with so much love had somehow become someone I no longer recognized. The day of the wedding arrived with painful ordinariness. I woke before dawn, not because I'd set an alarm, but because my body seemed to know that this day, one I had anticipated for months with such different expectations, had finally arrived. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains with a golden glow that seemed cruelly at odds with the heaviness in my chest. I made coffee and took it to the back porch, watching the neighborhood come alive. Mr. Peterson across the street retrieving his newspaper. The Henderson kids riding bikes in early morning circles, a delivery truck rumbling past. The world continuing as if nothing significant was happening, as if my heart wasn't breaking all over again with each passing hour. I found myself putting on the sage green dress around the time the ceremony would be starting. Not because I planned to go, I had accepted my banishment, but because I needed to physically experience what had been taken from me. I stood in front of the mirror, a 54-year-old woman in a beautiful dress with nowhere to go, and I allowed myself to really see the pain in my own eyes. I imagined Emma walking down the aisle, perhaps on Richard's arm since her own father had never been present. I imagined James's face lighting up when he saw her. I wondered if her something borrowed was from Vivian, if her flowers included the white lilacs she had loved since childhood, if she would dance to the Beatles song we used to sing together during our road trips. I wondered if she would think of me at all, or if I had already been so thoroughly erased from her narrative that my absence left no gap. By noon, I changed back into comfortable clothes. The dress went into the donation bag, joining other discarded dreams. I made a cup of tea and sat in my reading chair, staring out the window without really seeing anything. There was no dramatic movie moment, no last-minute text, no surprise appearance, no reconciliation. Just the slow passage of hours and the gradual acceptance that my daughter had married without me there to witness it. That evening, I did something unexpected. I didn't cry or rage or sink into depression. Instead, I called my oldest friend, Catherine, who lived 2 states away and who had known Emma since birth. "Trish, is everything okay? Isn't today Emma's wedding?" she asked, concerned by my mid-evening call. "It is," I said simply, and I wasn't there. The silence on the other end told me she understood the weight of those words. Catherine didn't ask for explanations. She didn't offer empty reassurances. She just listened as I finally told someone the truth about the growing distance, the group chat, the final text exchange. When I finished, the line was quiet for so long I thought, we might have been disconnected. "Patricia," she finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "You did not deserve this. Not any of it." Those words, simple, direct, validating, broke something open inside me. I had been so focused on understanding Emma's behavior, on examining what I might have done wrong, that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge the fundamental injustice of how I'd been treated. For the first time, I considered that perhaps this wasn't about my failures as a mother, but about something entirely outside my control. "What do I do now?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. "You live," Catherine said simply. "You remember who you were before you were Emma's mother. You find that woman again." After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, turning Catherine's words over in my mind. Who had I been before motherhood became my primary identity? I had been Patricia Foster, an art history major who dreamed of working in museum education. I had painted watercolors on Sunday afternoons. I had hiked in the mountains and written poetry about the changing seasons. I had been passionate about community theater and once played Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, to enthusiastic local reviews. When had I last thought about those parts of myself? When had I last done something solely because it brought me joy, not because it served my role as Emma's mother? That night, I made a decision. If I was being written out of my daughter's story, then perhaps it was time to reclaim the authorship of my own. I didn't need a seat at her wedding. I needed to find my place at my own table again, the one I had forgotten to set for myself all these years. The day after the wedding was Sunday. For most of Emma's life, Sunday mornings had been our special time. Pancakes with fresh berries, classical music playing softly in the background, the two of us in our pajamas until midday, talking about everything and nothing. I had treasured those mornings more than she would ever know. But this Sunday, there were no pancakes, no music, just the hollow echo of a home that suddenly felt too large for just one person. I wandered from room to room, touching objects that held memories, the ceramic bowl Emma had made in 6th grade art class, the framed photo of us at her college graduation, the quilt my mother had made for her when she was born. Each item seemed to vibrate with a history that now felt somehow altered, as if the past itself had been retroactively changed. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself scrolling through social media. Emma's wedding photos were already appearing online. The photographer had shared a preview. Emma in a flowing white dress with delicate lace sleeves, James looking handsome and awestruck beside her. The garden setting was exactly as I had imagined, with string lights twinkling, and the trees and white flowers everywhere. Emma's caption read simply, "The perfect day with my perfect person." There were hundreds of comments congratulating them, calling them a beautiful couple, wishing them happiness. Not a single mention of my absence, as if it were too uncomfortable to acknowledge, or worse, as if no one had even noticed. But what truly broke my heart was an image of Emma and Vivian embracing, both with tears in their eyes, captioned, "To the woman who made this day magical, my bonus mom in every way that matters." I stared at those words until they blurred. My bonus mom. As if I had been the temporary guardian, keeping her safe until someone more suitable came along. Had all of it meant nothing? The nights I'd spent beside her childhood bed when she had nightmares, the school projects I'd helped with until 2. I am beyond the way I'd worked 3 jobs when she needed braces, the countless small sacrifices that had shaped my entire adult life. Had none of it earned me even a mention on this day? I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator where a small cake sat on the middle shelf. I had baked it yesterday morning. Lemon with raspberry filling, her favorite since childhood. I had planned to light a candle and make a private toast to her happiness, a way of participating from afar in this milestone I wasn't permitted to witness. Now, the sight of it made my stomach turn. I removed it from the shelf, carried it directly to the trash can and dropped it in, container and all. The careful decorations, the love infused in each ingredient, all of it buried under coffee grounds and vegetable peelings. Then I sank to the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, and finally allowed myself to sob without restraint. Not the quiet tears I'd been hiding for weeks, but deep, guttural cries that seemed to come from some primal place inside me. I cried for the daughter I had raised, for the relationship I had lost, for the years I had given so completely only to be discarded when I was no longer needed. I cried for myself, for the woman who had done her imperfect best and still somehow failed in ways she couldn't understand. Eventually, I pulled myself up from the floor and moved to the couch, wrapping myself in the Afghan Emma had given me for Christmas 3 years ago. I stared at the ceiling, emotionally exhausted, my mind mercifully quiet after the storm of tears. That night, I dreamed of Emma as a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, wearing the purple butterfly dress she had insisted on wearing for an entire summer. In the dream, she looked up at me with wide, concerned eyes and asked, "Are you okay, Mommy?" I tried to reach for her, but she kept moving just beyond my grasp, fading into mist as I called her name. I woke with tears on my face and a clarity I hadn't felt before. I had reached my lowest point. There was nowhere to go but forward. The morning after that dream, I moved through my house like a woman twice my age, each step deliberate and heavy. My eyes were swollen from crying, my body aching from the night spent in awkward positions on the couch. I didn't bother with coffee. I didn't shower. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the collection of small succulents on the windowsill that Emma had given me last Mother's Day, some already withering from neglect. I told myself I needed to clean, not just the physical space, but the emotional landscape as well, clearing away the grief and expectations that had accumulated like dust in forgotten corners. I started with the hall closet, pulling out the gift bags, tissue paper, and ribbons I'd collected for wedding presents. These went into a donation box without ceremony or second thoughts. Then I came across a small box wrapped in silver paper with a white satin ribbon, the vintage sapphire earrings I had planned to give Emma on her wedding day. I had almost forgotten what else was tucked inside that package. My heart raced as I carefully untied the ribbon. Not because I thought she would ever receive this gift now, but because I suddenly remembered what I had placed beneath the jewelry. I sat slowly on the edge of my bed, opening the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in cream-colored satin, were the earrings, deep blue stones set in delicate silver filigree that had belonged to my grandmother. But underneath the jewelry box, folded into a perfect square, was a letter I had written weeks earlier, a letter I had forgotten in the whirlwind of rejection and hurt. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with my palm. It was written in my best handwriting, the kind I used for important documents and special occasions. My dearest Emma, today you become a wife, joining your life with James's in ways that will reshape who you are and who you will become. As you step into this new role, one filled with both joy and challenge, I hope you carry with you the certainty that you have always been loved exactly as you are. From the moment the nurse placed you in my arms, red-faced and indignant, at having been thrust into this bright, loud world, I have loved you with a fierceness that sometimes startled me. Every skinned knee, every triumph, every tear, every belly laugh, they are all etched into my heart like precious carvings. I know I haven't been perfect. I've made mistakes, spoken when I should have listened, protected when I should have let you fall. But please know that everything I did, every decision, every sacrifice, every boundary, came from a place of love so deep I sometimes felt I might drown in it. These sapphire earrings belong to your great-grandmother Elizabeth, who wore them on her own wedding day in 1922. They've traveled through time from her ears to mine, and now to yours. Not because traditions matter more than your choices, but because love leaves legacies that deserve to be remembered. As you build your new life with James, know that I am always here, not to direct or demand, but to support and celebrate. The greatest gift of my life has been watching you grow into the remarkable woman you are today. Your capacity for compassion, your fierce intelligence, your infectious laugh. These are the treasures I hope you share freely with James and with the world. My door will always be open. My heart will always have room, and my love will always be yours, without condition or expiration date. With all my heart, Mom, tears slipped silently down my cheeks as I read words written by a version of myself that still believed in happy endings, that trusted in the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. But strangely, the letter didn't make me feel foolish. Instead, it anchored me to something true, a reminder of the mother I had been, the love I had given, the values I had lived by. This letter wasn't for Emma anymore. It was for me. It was evidence that regardless of how things had unraveled, I had loved with my whole heart. Her silence hadn't undone that. Her rejection couldn't erase it. The truth of that love remained, even if its recipient had turned away. I returned the letter to its envelope, but removed the earrings from their box. After a moment's hesitation, I put them on, feeling their weight against my neck. They weren't a symbol of what I had lost, but of what I had always been. A woman, connected to generations before and after her, a link in a chain that remained unbroken despite the current strain. Something shifted after reading that letter. Not dramatically, not like a lightning bolt of revelation, but quietly, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning in grief. I stood up, walked to the bathroom mirror, and really looked at myself. The redness around my eyes, the tension in my shoulders, the downward turn of my mouth that had become habitual. But I also saw something else, a flicker of the woman I used to be, the one who existed before motherhood consumed my identity. I saw Patricia Foster, who once painted watercolor landscapes and wrote poetry about autumn leaves. I saw the woman who had survived abandonment by Emma's father and built a life filled with meaning despite that early betrayal. I saw someone still standing after the latest heartbreak, someone with stories yet to tell and experiences yet to embrace. I hadn't realized how completely I had lost touch with myself. Motherhood had been my primary identity for so long that when that role was diminished, I felt erased. I had placed my entire sense of worth in being needed, in being Emma's mother. And now that she had made it clear she didn't need or want me in that capacity, I had no idea who I was supposed to be. But the letter reminded me that I was more than just Emma's mother. I was Patricia, passionate, creative, resilient Patricia, who had somehow been buried under decades of lunch packing, permission slip signing, and soccer game attending. That woman still existed somewhere inside me. Perhaps it was time to find her again. That afternoon, I dug through the boxes in my garage until I found my old watercolor supplies. The paints were dried out, the brushes stiff from disuse, but the pad of paper was still pristine, waiting for color and life. I ordered new supplies online, not allowing myself to second-guess the expense or practicality. This wasn't about becoming a professional artist. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that had been set aside for too long. I also pulled out the journal I had abandoned years ago when Emma's college applications and my increased work responsibilities had squeezed out any time for personal reflection. The last entry was dated almost 9 years earlier, a lifetime ago. I sat at my kitchen table and opened to a fresh page. The words came slowly at first, rusty and uncertain, but they came. Today, I begin again. Not because I want to. Not because it's easy, but because I must. I am more than the mother who was left behind. I am a woman with chapters yet to write. By evening, I had filled 3 pages, not with lamentations about Emma, but with reflections on who I wanted to become in this unexpected new phase of my life. Who was Patricia when she wasn't defined primarily as someone's mother? It was time to find out. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply and without dreams. The days following the wedding unfolded with a strange new rhythm. I woke each morning without the weight of anticipation or dread that had dominated recent months. There was a curious freedom in having faced my worst fear, complete rejection by my only child, and finding myself still breathing, still functioning, still here. The painful certainty was somehow easier to bear than the constant anxiety of wondering where I stood. I established small rituals that anchored my days. Morning coffee on the back porch, watching cardinals dart between the oak branches. Afternoon walks through Riverside Park, nodding to familiar faces without feeling obligated to explain my subdued demeanor. Evening hours with my newly purchased watercolors, attempting to capture the sunset in washes of pink and gold. None of these activities filled the Emma-shaped void in my life, but they helped define the contours of who I might become without her. 1 week after the wedding, I received a package in the mail. The return address was from James's parents' affluent neighborhood. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Inside was a wedding favor, a small potted succulent in a ceramic pot with J&E and the wedding date stamped on the side. No note, no explanation. Just this generic token that might have been sent to distant relatives or colleagues who'd attended. I placed it on my kitchen windowsill beside the dying plants Emma had given me months earlier. A fitting metaphor, perhaps. That same day, I made a decision. I needed to clear emotional space, just as I had begun clearing physical space in my home. I took out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding. I muted Emma's social media accounts. Not blocking, not unfollowing. I wasn't ready for such finality, but removing the constant temptation to scroll through glimpses of a life I was no longer part of. I needed to stop seeking evidence of my erasure, stop checking to see if she'd mentioned me or thought of me. It was a small act of self-preservation, but it felt momentous. I also withdrew from the neighborhood book club I'd half-heartedly attended for years. The members were kind women, but they all knew Emma. They'd ask about the wedding, request photos, expect stories. I couldn't bear the thought of either lying or exposing my wound. Instead, I found an online writing group focused on personal narratives and journaling for healing. It felt safer to share fragments of my experience with strangers who knew me only through my words. 2 weeks after the wedding, I faced another decision. The elementary school where I worked as a counselor was hosting its annual career day, and I had always participated with enthusiasm. This year, my heart wasn't in it. I considered calling in sick, but something inside resisted the impulse to hide. These children, with their gap-toothed smiles and earnest questions, had nothing to do with my personal pain. They deserved my best self, or at least my honest effort. I arrived early that morning, arranging my display about mental health and emotional intelligence. The familiar routine was soothing. When the first class of third graders filed in, their curious eyes and eager energy awakened something I thought had gone dormant. For those 40 minutes, I was fully present, engaged in explaining how feelings work in our bodies, guiding them through simple mindfulness exercises, answering questions about how to handle playground conflicts. A small boy with serious eyes raised his hand. "Ms. Foster, what do you do when someone you love makes you really, really sad?" The question caught me off guard, piercing straight through my professional veneer to the raw wound beneath. I took a careful breath before answering. "That's a brave question," I said. "When someone we love hurts us, it's like carrying a heavy backpack we didn't ask for. We can't just throw it away because the feelings are real, but we can learn to carry it differently. We can take things out of the backpack one by one, talking to a trusted friend, writing in a journal, doing things that remind us we're still whole even when we're hurting. And sometimes, we discover we're stronger than we thought." The boy nodded solemnly, as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected. But it was my own words that echoed in my mind throughout the day. I had been counseling children through emotional difficulties for 15 years, yet somehow failed to apply those same principles to my own pain. I had been carrying my heavy backpack without examining its contents, without acknowledging my own strength in bearing its weight. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Dr. Maureen Lee, the therapist who had helped me through the devastating period after Daniel left, when Emma was still a toddler and I was drowning in single parenthood and abandonment issues. "Patricia," she said warmly when she returned my call. "It's been a long time. How are you?" "Not well," I admitted, the simplicity of honest words bringing immediate relief. "I think I need help again." She had an opening the following week, a cancellation she described as serendipitous timing. I took it as a small sign that perhaps the universe wasn't entirely indifferent to my struggle. In the days before my appointment, I continued my new routines, adding a daily writing practice that became increasingly important. I wrote not just about Emma and the wedding, but about my childhood, my brief marriage, my career choices, my dreams deferred and dreams fulfilled. I wrote about the young woman I had been at 22, fierce, creative, determined, before motherhood became my defining role. I wrote about the mother I had tried to be, present, supportive, loving. Without suffocation, I wrote about the woman I might become at 54, still strong, still capable of growth, still worthy of joy. My first session with Dr. Lee was both painful and liberating. She remembered details about Emma that I had forgotten sharing all. Those years ago, her attachment to a purple stuffed dragon, her early reading abilities, her fearlessness on the playground. "Tell me what's happened," she said simply. And I did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, the whole painful chronicle from the first signs of distance to the final exclusion. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than pitying. "Patricia, have you considered that this might not be about you at all?" I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Sometimes when young adults make dramatic breaks from parents, especially parents they've been close to, it's because they're struggling with their own identity. The closer the relationship, the more difficult it can be to differentiate, to become fully themselves. But cutting me out of her wedding? Mocking me to her friends? My voice cracked on the words. I'm not excusing her behavior, Dr. Lee said firmly. What she's done is hurtful and unnecessary. But understanding the possible why might help you process your grief without internalizing it as your failure. I considered her words. Are you saying this is just a phase? That she'll come back when she figures herself out? I'm not making predictions. She might reconcile when she gains more perspective, or she might not. The important question is, how do you build a meaningful life? Either way, that question followed me home, nestling into my thoughts like a stone in a stream, reshaping the flow of everything around it. How did I build a meaningful life that didn't depend on Emma's presence or approval? What would that even look like? The answer began to take shape 3 days later, when I received an email from Martin Chen, the director of the Community Arts Center where I had briefly volunteered before Emma's high school activities consumed my free time. The subject line read, Art Therapy Program, Seeking Facilitators. The email explained that the center was launching a new initiative combining mental health support with creative expression. Art therapy groups for children dealing with grief, seniors experiencing isolation, veterans with PTSD, and other vulnerable populations. They were looking for people with backgrounds in both counseling and artistic practice. It was as if someone had written a job description specifically for the person I was becoming, a blend of the counselor I had been for years and the artist I was rediscovering. I stared at the screen, my heart beating faster than it had in months. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit reply and expressed my interest. Martin responded within hours, inviting me to meet that weekend to discuss possibilities. I spent Friday evening updating my resume, surprised by how much I had to include when I really thought about it. 15 years of counseling experience, a bachelor's in art history, volunteer work with various community organizations, even my long-abandoned watercolor studies with a local artist. When I listed everything on paper, a portrait emerged of someone with more depth and capability than I had been acknowledging. Saturday morning, I stood before my closet, realizing I had been rotating between the same 3 comfortable but uninspiring outfits for weeks. Pushed to the back were clothes I had once loved, but had set aside as impractical or too bold for a school counselor and single mom. I pulled out a teal blouse with an asymmetrical hem and flowing sleeves, paired it with slim black pants, and added silver jewelry I had forgotten I owned. The woman in the mirror looked more alive than she had in months. The meeting with Martin went remarkably well. He remembered me from my volunteer days. You were brilliant with those reluctant teenage boys in the mural project, and was genuinely excited about my dual background. We talked for over an hour about the program's vision, potential approaches, and logistics. We can't offer full-time hours yet, he cautioned, but we have funding for 2 evening groups and a Saturday morning session to start. Would that work with your school schedule? Actually, I heard myself saying, I've been considering scaling back my school hours. This might be the perfect transition opportunity. The words surprised me even as I spoke them. I hadn't consciously planned to reduce my school counseling work, but as soon as the possibility formed itself into words, I knew it was right. I needed change. Not just new activities to fill time, but a fundamental shift in how I engaged with the world. Martin's enthusiasm was infectious. We could start with a pilot program next month. Just 6 weeks to test the approach, refine the model. Would you be interested in helping develop the curriculum? By the time I left the Art Center, I had agreed to co-facilitate 2 groups and help design the program framework. For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of genuine excitement about the future. Not just acceptance or resignation, but actual anticipation. That afternoon, I called the school district's HR department and inquired about reducing to part-time hours for the coming semester. The change would mean a significant pay cut, but I had always lived frugally. My modest home was nearly paid off, and I had emergency savings that could cushion the transition. The HR director seemed surprised. I had been a dedicated full-timer for years, but promised to discuss options with the principal on Monday. Sunday morning, I did something I hadn't done since Emma left for college. I pulled out my old easel from the garage, set it up in the backyard, and attempted to paint the magnificent oak tree that dominated my small garden. The result was amateurish, proportions slightly off, colors not quite capturing the morning light, but the process itself was exhilarating. 3 hours passed in what felt like minutes, my focus complete, my mind quiet for the first time in weeks. I was cleaning my brushes when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct made me pick up. Patricia? It's James. My daughter's husband's voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of distress. My heart stuttered. James, is everything okay? Is Emma? She's physically fine, he interrupted, his tone softening slightly at my obvious concern. But I need to talk to you. Would that be possible? I sank onto the porch steps, brush still dripping blue-tinted water onto the concrete. Of course. Do you want to come over, or would you prefer to meet somewhere? Could I come to you? Today, if that's not imposing too much. Today is fine, I said, glancing at my paint-splattered clothes and the artistic chaos on my patio. How about 4 o'clock? Thank you, he said, the relief in his voice palpable. I'll see you. Then, after we hung up, I sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. Why would James be calling me? What could he possibly need to discuss that couldn't be said in Emma's presence? A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach, but alongside it, a small spark of hope I couldn't quite suppress. I spent the next few hours in a state of controlled panic, showering, changing into fresh clothes, tidying the visible evidence of my new artistic pursuits, brewing fresh coffee, arranging cookies on a plate as if this were a normal social call. By the time the doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock, I had cycled through dozens of scenarios, none of which seemed to make sense of this unexpected development. James stood on my porch looking nothing like the confident groom from the wedding. Photos. His hair was uncombed, his button-down shirt wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He held a manila envelope in one hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. Thank you for seeing me, he said, his voice hoarse. Please come in. I stepped back, gesturing toward the living room. He sat on the edge of my sofa, perching like someone prepared for quick departure. I offered coffee, which he declined, then took the armchair opposite him, waiting. I don't know how to start this, he finally said, staring at the envelope in his hands. I didn't come to apologize for Emma. That's not why I'm here. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Go on. He looked up, then quickly down again. I found something. The morning after the wedding, it was in the car, under a pile of gifts. He extended the envelope toward me. It's yours, I think. The box with the earrings. I opened it because... He trailed off, shrugging helplessly. I took the envelope, recognizing it immediately as the packaging I had used to rewrap the earrings after finding the letter. You read the letter, I said softly. It wasn't a question. He nodded, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I did, and it changed everything. What do you mean? James ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Emma told me things about you, about your relationship. She said you were controlling, that you tried to take over the wedding, that you couldn't respect her boundaries. He paused, visibly uncomfortable. I believed her because she's my wife, and I thought I knew her. I thought I understood. The familiar pain twisted in my chest, but I remained silent, letting him continue. But that letter, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, wasn't written by someone trying to control anything. It was written by a mother who loves deeply and who was being pushed away for reasons I can't understand. Something in my expression must have shifted because he quickly added, "I'm not here to betray Emma or take sides. I needed to understand for myself, to see you, to hear you maybe, because something about all this doesn't make sense." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Thank you," I said simply, "for bringing this back, for being honest." "There's more," he admitted, running his palm over the envelope's surface. "Emma's been different since the wedding. Distant, anxious. She jumps every time her phone rings. She's not sleeping well." He hesitated. "Last night, I found her crying, in the guest bathroom at 3 a.m., looking at old photos of the two of you on her phone. But when I asked what was wrong, she shut down completely." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Emma, my confident, composed daughter, crying in secret over our photos. It didn't align with the cold, dismissive woman who had systematically removed me from her life. "James," I said carefully, "I appreciate you telling me this. I truly do. But I'm not sure what you're hoping I'll do with this information." He looked momentarily lost, then straightened his shoulders. "I don't know either. I just know that the woman I married seems to be carrying something heavy, something she won't share with me. And after reading that letter, I can't help wondering if cutting you out was a mistake she doesn't know how to undo." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words filling the space between us. I studied his face, the genuine concern, the confusion, the fatigue of someone carrying emotional burdens not entirely his own. "Can I ask you something, James?" He nodded. "Did Emma ever explain why she didn't want me at the wedding? Not just the general complaints, but the specific reason." He frowned slightly. "She said having you there would be too stressful, that you'd try to control everything, that you'd make the day about your relationship rather than our marriage." He paused. "But no, not a specific incident or reason." I nodded, processing this information. "One more question. Did she ever mention a group chat? Something called Emma's Bridal Babes?" His expression shifted to one of genuine confusion. "No, what's that?" I briefly explained about being accidentally added to the chat, about the mocking messages about Emma's comments. As I spoke, James's face transformed from confusion to shock to something like horror. "I had no idea," he said when I finished. "None at all. That doesn't sound like the Emma I know." "It didn't sound like the daughter I thought I knew either," I said quietly. James stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This makes even less sense now. Why would she?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Patricia, I don't know what to do with any of this. I love my wife. I want to support her. But I feel like I'm missing crucial pieces of the puzzle." I rose as well, crossing to stand near him. "James, I need to be very clear about something. I'm not asking you to fix this. I'm not asking you to be caught in the middle. Your loyalty should be to Emma, not to me." "But what if—" "No," I interrupted gently. "Whatever is happening with Emma, whatever led to this situation, it's not your responsibility to solve it. All you can do is create space where honesty feels safe. The rest is between Emma and me, if and when she's ready." He studied me for a long moment. "You're different than she described," he finally said. "People often are," I replied with a sad smile. "We're all more complicated than the stories others tell about us, or even the stories we tell ourselves." James nodded slowly, seeming to come to some internal decision. "I should go. Emma thinks I'm at the gym." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you for seeing me, for not making this harder than it already is." "Thank you for bringing the earrings back," I said. "And James? Take care of yourself too, not just Emma." After he left, I stood in my living room, the envelope containing the sapphire earrings clutched in my hand, my emotions a complicated tangle of hope, confusion, and lingering hurt. Part of me wanted to call Emma immediately, to demand explanations, to force a resolution. But a wiser part knew that approach would only drive her further away. Instead, I returned to my easel in the backyard, to the half-finished painting of the oak tree. I worked until the light faded, adding layers, adjusting shadows, seeking to capture not just the appearance of the tree but its essence, the strength in its weathered trunk, the resilience of branches that had withstood countless storms, the quiet dignity of roots that anchored it through changing seasons. As darkness fell, I stepped back to assess my work. It wasn't perfect, perhaps it never would be, but it had honesty and depth that my earlier attempt had lacked. Like me, it was a work in progress, becoming more authentic with each careful stroke, each brave revision. That night, I slept dreamlessly and woke with the first light of dawn. James's visit and revelations settling into my consciousness not as a solution, but as a reminder that even in our most isolated moments, connections remain, tangled, complicated, but present nonetheless. Whatever happened next, I was beginning to understand that healing wouldn't come from outside myself. It had to begin with the canvas of my own life, painted one intentional brushstroke at a time. The week following James's unexpected visit unfolded with a strange new energy. I moved through my days with purpose rather than just endurance. The conversation with my daughter's husband settling into my thoughts not as a promise of reconciliation, but as permission to stop seeing myself as the villain in Emma's story. Whatever demons she was wrestling with, whatever had driven her to push me away so completely they weren't entirely of my creation. This realization didn't diminish my grief, but it transformed it somehow. From a crushing weight to a companion I could acknowledge without being defined by its presence. I continued my morning routine of coffee on the porch, my afternoons at tea. School counseling children through their own small heartbreaks, my evenings exploring watercolors and journaling. But now these activities felt less like distractions from pain, and more like genuine expressions of a self I was reclaiming. On Wednesday, I received an email confirming my reduced hours at the elementary school and my new role at the community art center. Beginning next month, I would spend 3 days a week with my young students and 2 days developing and facilitating art therapy programs for various community groups. The principal's response had been surprisingly supportive. "You've given so much to our school community, Patricia. This sounds like a perfect blend of your talents. We're lucky to keep you part-time." That evening, I called Catherine to share my news. After updating her on James's visit and my career shift, I paused, realizing I hadn't asked about her life in weeks. "Enough about my drama," I said. "What's happening with you? How's the garden renovation going?" She laughed. "You know what? I abandoned that plan entirely. Life's too short for projects I don't actually enjoy. Instead, I joined a community orchestra. I'm playing cello again after 30 years. "Catherine, that's wonderful. Are you performing anywhere?" "Small recital next month. Nothing fancy, but I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure." She paused. "You should come visit. Make it a weekend trip. We could go hiking in the hills like we did in college." "I'd like that," I said, surprised to realize I meant it completely. The prospect of travel, of scenery beyond my familiar routines, appealed to me in a way it hadn't for years. "Let me check the calendar and get back to you." After we hung up, I found myself browsing online for watercolor workshops in Catherine's area, wondering if I might combine purposes, visiting my oldest friend while also deepening my reconnection with art. I found a weekend intensive taught by an artist I admired, scheduled 3 weeks after Catherine's recital. Perfect timing. Before I could overthink it, I registered and booked a modestly priced bed and breakfast for a 5-day stay. As I completed the reservation, I realized I hadn't needed to check with anyone, adjust around anyone else's schedule, or justify the expense to anyone but myself. There was freedom in this solitude, painful as its origins had been. For years, I had filtered my choices through the lens of motherhood. Was I setting a good example? Would this take time away from Emma? Could the money be better spent on her needs? Now, my choices could simply be mine, guided by my own values and aspirations rather than my role in someone else's life. Friday afternoon, I received a text from Martin at the Art Center. Grant approved. Program can expand sooner than expected. Can you meet Monday to discuss curriculum development? Another piece falling into place, another door opening where I had expected only walls. I texted back my availability, then spontaneously drove to the local art supply store. I spent an hour wandering the aisles, selecting brushes, papers, and paints not just for myself, but with an eye toward what might work for the diverse groups I would soon be guiding through creative expression. The clerk, a young woman with vibrant blue hair, offered suggestions based on her experience teaching children's art classes. The washable tempera is perfect for younger kids, she advised. But for teenagers and adults dealing with trauma or grief, I'd recommend these. She gestured toward a display of richly pigmented acrylics. There's something about the vibrancy and permanence that helps when processing difficult emotions. You can literally see your feelings take shape and stay there. Acknowledged. I nodded, appreciating both her practical knowledge and the unexpected wisdom in her observation. I'll take both, I decided. Different tools for different journeys. She smiled, helping me gather supplies. You know, we have a Sunday morning painting group that meets in the park. Very casual, all skill levels. You should join us sometime. I would have declined automatically just weeks earlier, protective of my solitude and wary of new social connections. Instead, I found myself asking, what time? And where exactly? She wrote the details on the back of my receipt, adding her name, Zoe, and a smiley face. Hope to see you there. We're a friendly bunch, promise. I left the store with 2 canvas tote bags full of supplies and a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly, not with the Emma-shaped hole still present in my life, but it was something adjacent to it. Possibility, perhaps. The recognition that even wounded hearts can find new connections, new purposes, new reasons to beat with enthusiasm rather than just necessity. Saturday morning, I rose early and decided to accept Zoe's invitation. I packed my new supplies, a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, then headed to the park she had mentioned. A small group was already gathering near the duck pond, about 8 people ranging from college age to elderly, setting up easels and chatting comfortably. Zoe spotted me hesitating at the perimeter and waved me over. Patricia, you came. Everyone? This is Patricia. She's developing art therapy programs at the community center. Simple introductions were made, no probing questions, no pressure to share personal stories, just first names and genuine welcomes. I set up my chair slightly, apart from the main circle, close enough to be part of the group, but with enough space to retreat into my own thoughts if needed. An older gentleman named Howard wandered over as I arranged my supplies. First time with us? He asked, his weathered face kind beneath a battered straw hat. Yes, I admitted. I'm just getting back into painting after a very long break. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. Art has patience. It waits for us to return when we're ready. He gestured toward the pond. I've been painting this same view every Saturday for 3 years. It's never the same twice. Light changes, seasons shift, even the waterfowl have their dramas. He chuckled. Rather like life itself, I suppose. Something about his gentle philosophy touched me. I'm relearning how to see, I said, surprising myself with the confession. Best reason to paint, Howard replied simply, then wandered back to his own easel, giving me space without making me feel abandoned. For the next 2 hours, I lost myself in observation and creation. The morning light on water, the graceful arc of a willow branch, the unexpected blue-green of shadows beneath the bridge. I wasn't creating a masterpiece, but I was fully present, In a way I hadn't been for months. When we broke for a communal snack around 11, people sharing homemade cookies and fruit while admiring each other's work, I felt a tentative sense of belonging. No one asked why I was alone or mentioned family. No one required explanations for my presence or my occasional quietness. I was simply Patricia, a woman with watercolors and a developing eye, welcome exactly as I was. I drove home with my still damp painting on the passenger seat, contemplating Howard's words about art having patience. Perhaps healing had patience too. Perhaps it waited quietly for us to be ready, not forcing its timeline but remaining available, when we finally turned toward it. Sunday evening, I received another unexpected communication, an email from the university where I had completed my master's in counseling 15 years earlier. The subject line read, "Seeking adjunct instructor, art and expressive therapies." The message explained that the psychology department was expanding its counseling program to include more creative approaches to therapy, and they were seeking practitioners with both clinical experience and artistic background to teach a new course. One of the professors, a woman I vaguely remembered from my graduate studies, had heard about my dual role at the elementary school and community art center, and thought I might be interested. This would be one evening class per week for the spring semester, the email concluded, an opportunity to shape future counselors while continuing your own practice. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Teaching at the university level had never been part of my career plan. I had always focused on direct service, on working with children rather than training others. But the idea held immediate appeal. Sharing. What I was learning about the intersection of art and healing, influencing a new generation of therapists, stretching myself intellectually in ways my current work didn't require. Before doubt could take root, I drafted a response expressing interest in attaching my updated resume. If nothing came of it, I would continue on my current path. But if this door opened too, well, I would step through it with curiosity and an open heart. Monday morning brought sunshine and an unexpected delivery, a thick cream envelope with my name handwritten in unfamiliar script. Inside was a formal invitation to a gallery opening featuring local artists working in various therapeutic settings. The personal note at the bottom read, "Patricia, Martin mentioned your background and new role. Would love to connect about possible collaboration. Elena Santos, Gallery Director." Another thread appearing in the tapestry of my emerging life. Another connection I couldn't have anticipated when I was drowning in grief just weeks earlier. I marked the date on my calendar, already considering which of my new outfits might be appropriate for such an event. That afternoon, I met with Martin to discuss the expanded art therapy program. What I had expected to be a brief planning session evolved into a 3-hour deep dive into possibilities. Groups for teens in foster care, workshops for cancer patients, intergenerational projects bringing seniors and children together through collaborative art. "We need to document this work," Martin said as we were wrapping up, "not just for the grant requirements, but to build a case for arts funding in community mental health. Would you be open to co-authoring an article for the Journal of Creative Therapies? My background is administrative, but your clinical experience combined with artistic practice would make for a compelling perspective." "I've never published professionally," I admitted. "First time for everything," he replied with an encouraging smile. "Think about it. No pressure, but I think you have important insights to share." I drove home contemplating this latest invitation to expand beyond my comfortable boundaries. Writing for publication? Teaching college students? Attending gallery openings as a professional rather than just an appreciative observer? A month ago, these opportunities would have seemed not just unlikely but almost laughably out of reach for a school counselor whose creative aspirations had been dormant for decades. Yet here they were, possibilities unfurling like spring leaves after a long winter, not erasing my pain but existing alongside it, offering purpose and connection even as I continued to grieve the relationship with my daughter. Thursday afternoon, I left work early for my second appointment with Dr. Lee. I had debated canceling, wondering if I still needed therapy now that I was finding my footing. But the complexity of my emotions, hope and grief tangled together like roots beneath a forest floor, convinced me to keep the appointment. "You seem different today," Dr. Lee observed as I settled into her comfortable office. "There's a lightness about you that wasn't there before." I nodded, sharing the developments of the past 2 weeks, James's visit, my career shifts, the new connections and opportunities emerging in unexpected places. "That's remarkable progress, Patricia," she said when I finished. "But I'm curious, how are you feeling about Emma in the midst of all this positive movement?" The question pierced straight to the heart of my confusion. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm betraying her by finding joy without her. Other days I feel anger bubbling up when I least expect it. Not just sadness anymore, but genuine frustration that she could discard me so completely. And then there are moments when I think of what James said about finding her crying over our photos, and I just feel confused. If she misses me, why did she push me away? What was so terrible about me that she needed to cut me out of the most important day of her life?" Dr. Lee listened thoughtfully. "Those are all valid feelings. Grief isn't linear and neither is healing. The fact that you're building a meaningful life doesn't mean you've stopped loving Emma or missing her presence." "But what if she never comes back?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if whatever drove her away is permanent? Do I just move on without my only child?" "You're already answering that question through your actions," Dr. Lee pointed out gently. "You're showing tremendous resilience by creating meaning and finding new connections. That doesn't preclude reconciliation if circumstances change. But it does mean you're refusing to place your worth and happiness entirely in someone else's hands, even someone you love deeply." I considered her words. "I still hope," I confessed. "Not every day, but sometimes. Is that naive?" "Hope isn't naive when it's balanced with reality," she replied. "You can hope for healing while also accepting that you can't control when or if it happens. The important thing is that you're not placing your life on hold while waiting." I left her office feeling both validated and challenged. The path forward wasn't about choosing between moving on or holding space for reconciliation. It was about doing both simultaneously, holding seemingly contradictory truths with compassion, rather than conflict. Saturday morning found me once again with the park painting group, this time positioned closer to the main circle. Howard nodded approvingly at my growing confidence, and Zoe introduced me to her grandmother, a retired art teacher who offered thoughtful suggestions about capturing depth in watercolor landscapes. As we were packing up around noon, my phone buzzed with a text notification. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it immediately as Emma's. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the message. "Mom, I don't know if you're ready to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you if you're not. But I've been thinking a lot. Would it be possible to talk sometime? No pressure. I understand if it's too soon." The world seemed to pause around me, the chattering painters, the children feeding ducks, the joggers on the path, all fading to background as I stared at those words. Not an apology, not an explanation, but an opening. A small crack in the Zadi wall that had seemed impenetrable just weeks earlier. I sat on a nearby bench, allowing myself to feel the full impact of this unexpected outreach. My first instinct was to respond immediately, eagerly, to grab this thread of connection and pull with all my strength. But wisdom gained through painful experience counseled patience, thoughtfulness. After several deep breaths, I typed a response. "Hello, Emma. Yes, I would be open to talking when you're ready. I'm free most evenings after 6 or weekend afternoons. Let me know what might work for you." Simple, direct, neither coldly formal nor desperately enthusiastic. An acknowledgement of her reach without surrendering the boundaries I'd been learning to establish. I pressed send before second-guessing could paralyze me. Her reply came almost immediately. Would tomorrow at 3 work? Maybe coffee at Riverside? Cafe? A public location, neutral territory, limited time frame, all sensible parameters for a potentially emotional conversation. That works for me. I'll see you then, I replied, then tucked my phone away, rejoining the group as they finished gathering their supplies. Everything okay? Howard asked, noticing my momentary withdrawal. I'm not sure yet, I answered honestly, but I think it might be. That evening, I felt the familiar anxiety rising. What should I wear? What if the conversation went poorly? What if she just wanted to formally end our relationship rather than repair it? I paced my living room, considering calling Catherine for advice, but something stopped me. This was my journey to navigate, my relationship to rebuild or release. External opinions, however well-intentioned, wouldn't change the fundamental truth that tomorrow's conversation was just one step on a much longer path. Instead of calling anyone, I retreated to my newly established art corner in the spare bedroom. I selected a fresh sheet of paper and began painting without any particular plan or reference, just color and movement, guided by the emotional tide within me. Blues and purples swirled into greens and golds, creating a landscape that existed nowhere but in my own interior world. The act of creation didn't eliminate my anxiety, but it channeled it into something I could see and acknowledge, rather than something that consumed me from within. When the painting was complete, I propped it on the windowsill to dry and wrote, in my journal, "Tomorrow I will see my daughter for the first time since she told me not to come to her wedding. I don't know what she wants to say. I don't know if healing is possible. But I know this. I am not the same woman who sat broken on her kitchen floor 3 weeks ago. Whatever happens tomorrow, I am building a life with meaning and connection. Emma may choose to be part of that life again, or she may not. I will always love her, always hope for her happiness, always keep the door open. But I will no longer wait beside that door, putting my own journey on hold. I've learned that loving someone completely doesn't require diminishing myself in the process. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know I can face it standing firmly on the foundation I'm building. Not perfect, not complete, but authentically mine." Sunday dawned clear and mild. I woke early, made my coffee, and sat on the porch watching birds at the feeder I had installed just days earlier. Their busy, purposeful movements reminded me that life continues its rhythms regardless of human drama. Seeds are sought, nests are built, songs are sung. There was something comforting in their simple persistence. I dressed with care, but without obsession, a casual blue dress I'd always liked, comfortable sandals, minimal jewelry. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table on the outdoor patio where the afternoon sunshine created dappled patterns through the trellis overhead. I ordered a chamomile tea, knowing that caffeine would only amplify my nervousness. At precisely 3 o'clock, I saw her approaching from the parking lot. Emma, my only child, the person whose absence had created such a profound void in my life. She looked both familiar and somehow changed. Thinner, perhaps, her posture less confident than I remembered. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail rather than the elaborate styles she had favored recently. Our eyes met as she reached the patio. For a moment, we both froze, the weight of all that had happened, and all that remained unsaid, hanging in the air between us. Then she took a step forward, and I rose from my chair, and somewhere in the middle we met in an embrace that was neither fully comfortable nor entirely strained. "Hi, Mom," she whispered against my shoulder, her voice carrying a tremor I hadn't heard since she was a child frightened by thunderstorms. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, the endearment slipping out before I could consider whether it was still appropriate. We separated, both blinking back tears, and sat across from each other at the small table. A server appeared almost immediately, taking Emma's order for iced tea before tactfully withdrawing. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I had imagined this scene countless times over the past weeks, rehearsed what I might say, how I might respond to various scenarios. But now, faced with the reality of my daughter across from me, all those prepared scripts evaporated. "Thank you for coming," Emma finally said, her fingers nervously tracing the pattern on the tablecloth. "I wasn't sure you would." I wasn't sure either, I admitted, choosing honesty over easy reassurance. "But here we are." She nodded, meeting my eyes briefly before looking away. "I don't know where to start." "Perhaps with why you wanted to meet," I suggested gently. Emma took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the effort. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the wedding, about how things happened between us, about who I've been becoming." She paused as the server returned with her drink, then continued after another steadying breath. "I'm not proud of how I treated you, Mom. I can't explain it in a way that makes sense, even to myself. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. So deeply sorry." The words I had longed to hear, yet they brought no simple resolution, no instant healing. The pain of the past months couldn't be erased with a single apology, no matter how sincere. "What happened, Emma?" I asked, the question that had haunted my sleepless nights finally finding voice. "We were always so close. What changed?" She stared into her glass, as if the answers might be found floating among the ice cubes. "I've been asking myself the same question, trying to understand why I pushed away the person who has always loved me most consistently." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. I think I got lost somewhere between who I was and who I thought I needed to become." As our conversation unfolded over the next hour, no dramatic revelations emerged, no single event or misunderstanding that could be neatly resolved. Instead, Emma described a gradual unraveling of her sense of self, a growing pressure from James's family to fit a particular mold, and her own anxiety about maintaining her identity within her new marriage. "Vivian has very strong opinions about everything," she explained. "About how a wife should behave, about family dynamics, about social expectations. She's not cruel, just overwhelming. And somehow, pushing you away became my misguided attempt to prove I could stand on my own." "By hurting the person who had always supported your independence?" I asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "I know it." "Makes no sense," Emma admitted. "It's like I created this narrative where your love was somehow holding me back rather than lifting me up. The more James's family tried to shape me, the more I resented your acceptance. It was easier to make you the problem than to set boundaries with them." We talked about the group chat, about her comments that had wounded me so deeply. She cringed visibly when I described discovering the messages. "I was performing," she said quietly. "Trying to fit in with these women who seemed so sophisticated, so certain of who they were. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone who would mock her own mother to gain approval from virtual strangers. By the time our cups were empty and the afternoon shadows had lengthened, we had reached no neat resolution, no Hollywood ending with all conflicts resolved. But we had begun something perhaps more valuable, an honest conversation about painful truths, a foundation for whatever might come next." "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Emma said as we prepared to leave. "I wouldn't, in your position, but I hope we might find a way forward somehow." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I will always love you, Emma. That never changed, even when you pushed me away. But trust takes longer to rebuild than a single conversation can accomplish." She nodded, squeezing my fingers. "Can we try? Maybe coffee again next week?" "I'd like that," I said, meaning it completely despite the complexity of emotions still swirling within me. One step at a time. As we parted in the parking lot, Our hug was briefer, but somehow more genuine than our initial greeting had been. No pretense of instant healing, no glossing over of deep wounds, just two women acknowledging both the pain between them and the possibility of something new emerging from its ashes. I drove home in the golden light of late afternoon. My heart, neither completely healed nor still shattered, somewhere in between, holding both pain and possibility. The path forward would not be simple or straight. There would be setbacks and difficult conversations, moments of doubt and lingering hurt. But there would also be opportunity for genuine understanding, for rebuilding on a foundation of truth rather than expectation or performance. As I turned onto my street, I realized that regardless of how my relationship with Emma evolved from this point, I would continue becoming the woman I had discovered these past weeks. The teacher, the artist, the community builder, the friend. Not just Emma's mother, though that role would always be precious to me, but Patricia in her fullness, with passions and purposes extending in many directions. That evening, I added a final entry to the journal I had begun the day after the wedding. Today I saw my daughter again. Not as the little girl I raised or the bride who excluded me, but as a young woman struggling with her own journey, making mistakes as we all do. I don't know yet if we can rebuild what was broken. But I know this. I am whole either way. Not because pain doesn't matter, but because I have learned that pain, too, can be a teacher. It showed me parts of myself I had forgotten, strengths I didn't know I possessed, possibilities I had never considered. Whatever tomorrow brings, I will face it as myself, not diminished by rejection, not defined by loss, but expanded by the courage to begin again, to see with new eyes, to paint with bold strokes on the canvas of a life that is, and has always been, my own masterpiece in progress. Text marked down my daughter banned me from her wedding. The next day, her husband called me in tears. Conclusion. In the months that followed our first tentative reconnection, at Riverside Cafe, Emma and I established a new rhythm to our relationship. Not the seamless closeness we had once shared, but something more intentional, more conscious. We met for coffee every Sunday afternoon. Neutral territory where we could gradually rebuild trust through conversation rather than expectation. Initially, these meetings were sometimes strained, filled with careful small talk and deliberate avoidance of deeper wounds. But as weeks passed, we began addressing the patterns that had led to our estrangement. Her need for independence colliding with her fear of disappointing me, my identity so wrapped up in motherhood that I had sometimes missed seeing her as a separate individual with her own journey. I felt like I couldn't measure up to how much you loved me, she confessed during our fourth meeting. Like your whole world revolved around me, and that was a weight I didn't know how to carry. I never meant it to be a burden, I replied, genuinely surprised by this perspective. I thought love was supposed to be unconditional, abundant. It was, she said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. But sometimes it felt like I couldn't possibly deserve it all, like I was constantly disappointing you just by being human and flawed. These conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary, excavating misunderstandings that had been buried for years beneath our outwardly perfect mother-daughter relationship. We were learning to see each other not through the distorted lens of expectation, but with clearer, more compassionate vision. Meanwhile, my own life continued unfolding in directions I could never have anticipated during those dark days after the wedding. The university approved my position as an adjunct instructor, and I found myself developing a curriculum for creative approaches to trauma recovery that would begin in the spring semester. The article Martin and I co-authored about our community art therapy program was accepted by the Journal of Creative Therapies, bringing attention and additional funding to our work. My watercolor skills improved steadily through weekly practice with the Park Group, which had become not just a creative outlet, but a genuine community. Howard introduced me to the local arts council, where I was invited to participate in a group show focusing on art as healing. The piece I submitted, a triptych depicting grief, transition, and renewal through abstract landscape elements, received thoughtful reviews in the local paper. Emma attended that exhibition opening, arriving alone with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These reminded me of the ones we used to pick on our hikes," she said, handing them to me with shy pride. It was the first time she had seen my artwork, displayed publicly, the first time she had witnessed this aspect of my identity emerging from dormancy. "These are beautiful, Mom," she said, standing before my triptych. "I had no idea you could paint like this." "Neither did I admitted. "I'm still learning who I am beyond being your mother." She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "I think maybe that's what I needed to see all along, that you had your own identity, your own passions, that I wasn't your entire world." "You were never my entire world," I corrected gently. "You were my priority, my greatest joy. But I was always more than just your mother, even when I forgot that myself." That night marked a subtle but significant shift in our healing process. Emma began asking more questions about my work, my art, my new friendships. She seemed genuinely interested in discovering the woman beneath the mother she had alternately clung to and pushed away. James remained largely in the background during these early months of reconciliation, giving Emma space to navigate our relationship without his influence. But as autumn arrived and the anniversary of their first date approached, he reached out with an unexpected invitation. "Emma and I would like to have you over for dinner," he said when he called. "Nothing formal, just a home-cooked meal and maybe some board games afterward, if you're comfortable with that." I accepted with cautious optimism, aware that this represented another threshold in our evolving family dynamic. The evening proved surprisingly relaxed. Emma had prepared her grandmother's lasagna recipe, James opened a good bottle of wine, and conversation flowed more naturally than I had dared to hope. We carefully avoided wedding topics, focusing instead on present circumstances and future plans. As James cleared the dinner plates, Emma disappeared briefly into their spare bedroom, returning with a small gift-wrapped package. "This is long overdue," she said, placing it before me with evident nervousness. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Emma, as a young child of perhaps 6, fast asleep on my lap as I read a storybook, both of us bathed in golden lamplight. The inscription on the frame read simply, "Where I learned what love feels like." "James's mom took this during one of our visits," Emma explained. "She found it while organizing old photos and gave it to me last month." I realized I've been so focused on who I want to become that I've been denying where I came from, who helped me become the person I am. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation with swelling music and flowing tears. It was quieter than that, more nuanced, a single step on a longer journey of mutual rediscovery. But as I drove home that evening, the framed photo carefully placed on the passenger seat beside me, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. The following week brought another unexpected development. Catherine called to confirm details for my upcoming visit, then added, "I forgot to mention, there's an elementary school near me with an opening for an art therapy consultant. Part-time, perfect complement to your university teaching. The principal asked if I knew anyone qualified. I might have mentioned you." "Catherine, that's 3 hours from here," I pointed out, though not dismissively. "Just planting seeds," she replied. "No pressure. But sometimes a fresh start in a new place has its advantages." I thanked her for thinking of me, promising to consider the possibility without making any commitments. But the idea took root in my imagination, a life rebuilt in a different location, close enough to maintain my healing relationship with Emma, but far enough to truly establish my independent identity. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from my attorney. The documents concerned the final settlement of my mother's estate, a small property in the mountains that had been tied up in probate for years. The cabin needed significant renovation, but it was set on 5 acres of woodland with a stream running through the northwestern corner. My mother had always planned to retire there but had never gotten the chance. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, a map of the property catching my attention. It was located exactly halfway between my current home and Catherine's town, 90 minutes in either direction, remote enough for peace but accessible for connection. That evening, I called Emma. "I'm considering some changes," I said after we'd exchanged greetings. "Nothing immediate, but possibilities for the future." I told her about the mountain property, the teaching opportunity near Catherine, my growing sense that a physical relocation might support the internal transformation already underway. "You're thinking of moving?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Exploring options," I clarified. "The cabin would need extensive work before it would be livable. But yes, I'm considering what it might mean to create a new home space that reflects who I'm becoming." The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken questions and concerns. Would this be because of what happened between us? Emma finally asked, "Are you leaving because I hurt you?" "No," I answered truthfully. "This isn't about escaping painful memories. It's about moving towards something new that calls to me. The timing might seem connected, but the motivation isn't about our past. It's about my future." "I'd miss our Sunday coffees," she said softly. "We'd find new rhythms," I assured her. "Different doesn't have to mean distant." After we hung up, I walked through my house with fresh eyes, seeing not just the memories it contained, but the limitations it represented. This had been a good home, a place where I had raised my daughter and weathered many storms. But perhaps the next chapter of my story needed different surroundings. A physical space that reflected the internal expansiveness I was discovering. The following weekend, I drove to the mountain property, wanting to experience it firsthand before making any decisions. The cabin was indeed in disrepair, roof damaged, porch sagging, interior musty from years of neglect. But the setting was breathtaking. Mature trees creating dappled shadows across the clearing, the musical sound of the stream providing constant, gentle background, wildflowers pushing through tangles of undergrowth as if illustrating nature's persistence in reclaiming beauty from neglect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.